do your best to not hold the pieces of you who make you who you are, that make you unique. Do not hold back, because that's what makes us powerful.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Jaymes Black, the CEO of the Trevor Project, which is the leading suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people in the world. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. Number one, Jaymes is a transformative leader who brings corporate savvy and personal grit. After growing up in conservative South Texas and dropping out of high school, they went on to earn an MBA, lead IT operations in the private sector, and rise to executive roles in national nonprofits. Number two, Jaymes has made history as the first Black and non-binary CEO of both Family Equality and the Trevor Project, breaking barriers, testifying before Congress, and launching peer networks that center queer youth and families. And lastly, Jaymes leads with courage, authenticity, and deep purpose. Whether on Capitol Hill, the runway at Dapper Q, or supporting families in crisis, they use story and strategy to help people feel seen and to build movements that save lives. Jaymes, you've been called a trailblazer for queer families, a fearless advocate for LGBTQ plus youth, and one of Out Magazine's 100 most influential LGBTQ plus leaders, among many other accolades. Today, we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
Well, I appreciate you making time. I know that you've been in your CEO role now for a little over a year. It's been a whirlwind of a year, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But just to start off, I want to ask you, you're leading the Trevor Project at a critical moment for LGBTQ plus youth. Who do you need to influence to advance this mission?
Who we have to influence spans from the young people that we serve to policymakers. And our mission depends on influencing a wide range of people. It also includes corporate partners and donors who fund and amplify our work. We also need to influence our base, and we need to influence those who aren't our core audience, those whose minds are made up, and they think that they know who we are, and those folks whose minds may not be made up, and they don't quite understand the challenge or the issue of LGBTQ plus youth suicide prevention. And in that regard, influence becomes a conversation about how we are alike, not how we're different. It becomes a conversation about our shared values, our shared experiences as humans, and then having and illustrating an authentic connection to those values. So the stakes are incredibly high, and we need to be in dialogue with anyone who has the power to make decisions that impact LGBTQ plus youth, especially in today's climate.
So for folks who are not familiar with who you are, how do you describe the Trevor Project? What do they need to know?
First of all, what I want to say is that the Trevor Project was the organization that I needed as a young queer kid. And rather than start off with the organization does this and that, I have to start with what the Trevor Project means to me and how much I could have used an organization like the Trevor Project when I was growing up in conservative South Texas, as you just mentioned in the intro. And then I connect that with the same way that I felt as a young queer person growing up in South Texas. Other youth who are, whether they're in South Texas or whether they're on the East Coast, wherever they are in this country, I'm sure that they can resonate with needing an organization like Trevor. And so the Trevor Project is important to thousands of LGBTQ plus youth all over the country. And we are the national suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ plus young people. And we've been doing this work for 27 years. since our founding in the 90s.
I'm sure folks in the corporate world, part of your influence, they wonder, how has that work changed over several decades? I know, I mean, maybe you could tell us about how it got started and sort of, but how the work that you've done has really evolved and expanded over that time.
It's interesting. I mean, we started off as a crisis intervention organization. I mean, that was the crisis of the moment, and it still is the crisis of the moment. And the way that has evolved is that not only are we still needed for crisis intervention services, but we also are training other organizations. We're also training corporations and state organizations on how to interact with LGBTQ plus young people. We are focusing on our research. Research was not something that we did when we started back in the 90s, and now we have a world-class research arm, as well as prevention. The training and the research falls under prevention, and prevention is really about ensuring that the crisis doesn't happen in the first place. And how do we do that? We ensure that people understand how to interact with LGBTQ plus youth. We understand the systems that they interact with day in, day out, have the proper training, and again, competency to understand that the ways in which we welcome or unwelcome LGBTQ plus young people depends on how they experience the world. And oftentimes when they are not welcomed, that is what leads to suicidal ideation. That's what leads to a phone call or a text or a chat to the Trevor Project.
Yeah, and I think it's just so interesting to hear that evolution and kind of the power of influence, from the organizational side, because when you started, you were trying to influence, one individual on the other side of a phone early in Trevor's history. And now a lot of folks may not have been familiar that you're providing training to really scale that influence and make a larger impact on the lives of young people. And then, of course, the research that you mentioned as well to help folks understand. So it just kind of shows the growing
Yeah,
mission as the organization has
absolutely.
expanded. I want to talk about kind of bring it to your career a little bit. I mean, influencing policymakers, corporate partners, and young people are a big part of what you do today. But I know when we've spoken before, you've said that you didn't fully understand influence early in your career. And I wonder if, a lot of people probably have had that same feeling. And I wonder if you could talk about how you came to recognize the power of influence and share your own journey with us.
What I will say is that I made many mistakes early in my leadership career as it relates to influence. I mean, I do not think a leader can be successful or thrive if they do not understand how to successfully apply influence, right? It's part of what we do. And many times, if I had to influence a decision, again, I didn't look at it as influence, but I had to either convince people to approve a project or convince my staff for one thing or another. I tried to influence by force. And that was one of the big mistakes I made. But like, if you look at the history of the word influence, it has Latin origin, but the Latin word means inflow. And while it had like astrological connections, it started to be connected to how we connect with people and how we change objectives to influence people. So if you think about that inflow, it should flow when you're trying to influence people. And I was doing more to force decisions. And so for me, it's influence is an emotional process more than a logical process. But early in my career, I didn't understand this concept. And I just knew that I wanted to learn from people, though, that I had. And I knew people had something. The leaders that I looked up to, they had something. And now I know they knew how to influence. And I asked to be mentored by anyone who would listen, those folks who I think embodied what we would call a chief influencer. I watched closely in how they moved in a room and how they made decisions, how they made difficult decisions, their executive presence. And I began to notice is what they said and how they said it, how it led to people opening their minds. how it led to the approval of a project or an initiative when I was in corporate America, how it enabled funding that we needed for a critical project when people thought that that project was going to be a no or be rejected. And so that's when I started looking at influence as something that you build intentionally and you use it to meet your objectives and to connect with people and to fulfill your mission. And again, building relationships is really important as well. It's not about just meeting an objective. It's also how we connect with each other.
Absolutely. And I love what you shared about the root. Nobody's ever mentioned that over 100 interviews we've done, but it makes so much sense because I hear leaders talk about to truly influence, it can't be forced. It can't be too heavy handed because then you get that pushback. You really have to find the right way to, bring people along and so forth. And so thinking of that as in flow. Oh, I absolutely love that. I think it just
And
paints a
slow.
beautiful
Yes.
picture. Isn't that what we want in life? It feels like a flow rather than a
Being in
wall.
flow. Exactly.
Well, you made a pivot in your career, a pretty big pivot from the corporate world going into the nonprofit world. And I wonder if you could talk about what that shift was like and, what did you discover on the other side when you decided to leave corporate America
Mhm.
and join, Family Equality Council, a small nonprofit
Yeah.
that was doing really important work, but was just much smaller from a headcount size than the teams you were leading previously.
Yeah. Yeah. The shift to corporate, or excuse me, from corporate to nonprofit, I refer to it as my COVID clarity moment because it happened at the height of the pandemic, 2020, 2021. And really what influenced that pivot was this desire to do more for LGBTQ plus people, to do more than I felt that I was doing in corporate America. I had a successful career in corporate America, and I was sitting on employee resource groups and influencing the culture in very, I think, effective ways at Charles Schwab, for example, influencing our CEO to ensure that when he spoke about inclusivity, that he did not forget LGBTQ plus people, to influence folks on how we felt as a Black person during George Floyd. I was using my voice to influence folks, but I did not think that I was making the impact that I could make if I worked at an LGBTQ plus organization. And I did not know where I was going to go. I just knew that I wanted to do something to use the adversity that I had encountered to do more for the LGBTQ plus community. And that ended up being this really, I call it serendipitous experience where as soon as I was thinking about all this, Family Equality had a role for a CEO. And I decided to apply for it. And, as we're speaking about influence, I have to say that I had to influence their board to interview me because I did not have the skill set and the characteristics that they believe I should have because I came from corporate. They wanted a nonprofit leader. That is what they wanted. Someone who knew the movement, someone who grew up in the movement. And I was a traditional for-profit hire, and that was not something that they even thought about in terms of their interviewing. So I didn't have the opportunity to influence them in person just yet, but I did influence through my cover letter. I did influence through my letter of interest in my resume. And so I don't regret that move at all. I think it was the right thing to do. But what I found on the other side is that the influence that I was able to easily navigate in corporate was not the influence or have the same level of influence that I had in the nonprofit sector. I was basically starting from scratch, building my influence within an entirely new sector with new partners, a sector that I had not been a part of and didn't understand all of its all the ins and outs of it.
How did you rebuild or begin to rebuild influence when you felt that experience?
I believed in the mission of family equality so much, so much. And I remember as I was entering to this new role and talking to people who had been in the movement for a very long time, who had larger organizations with much more influence than family equality, I would mention family equality and they would say, well, I've never heard of this organization. I've been a part of the movement for years. Why have I not heard of this organization? And so what I started to do is to educate people on family equality's roots and influence them that way to say, family equality has been around since 1979. And we were started by a group of gay dads at the first March on Washington. And this is how we started to build this organization of parents. And then people would go, oh, so you were part of the movement, like when we were starting the very beginnings of a movement and you have those roots. Oh, the first March on Washington, that really influenced people to go, oh, wait, maybe we should have a second look at this organization. You're small, we've never heard of you, but you have some deep roots. And so starting to tell the story about how we were founded and connecting that to the larger movement, but also being able to translate the business experience that I had and the nonprofit experience that I had, being able to make that translatable in a way to say, yes, we are a nonprofit, but here are business activities and business processes that will help drive the movement and help drive our business.
And one of the things I've heard is that, like you said, Family Equalities, it wasn't a big name brand, but you earned credibility by just showing up over and over and making sure that you were in, the right rooms and the right spaces and contributing.
Yes. In every room that I could be in, I was in that room. In every conversation that we could be in every movement meeting, we were able to get into tables and meetings that we were not in before. And that is because I kept showing up. But that showing up wasn't just transactional, just to show up and sit there. What am I offering? What am I offering this group of people? Again, you are the smallest organization at the table with a smaller budget, smaller headcount, as you just mentioned. What are you offering while you're at this table? And what I offered is to learn everything I could about family equality, not just my passion for the mission, but how we enabled LGBTQ plus people to become parents, to start families, to not just start families, to sustain your families. That deeply resonated with people at these tables to say, oh, this is a really important organization, not just for the movement, just for LGBTQ plus people at large in this country. And building that knowledge and connecting it to what meant something to people, but also that showing up built trust, right? It was every time I'm going to show up, I'm going to be a good partner. I'm going to offer something to the meeting, and I'm going to explain how this organization helps the movement at large.
What you said about showing up kind of reminds me of what I also feel like is one of the big challenges so many chief executives and chief influencers face, is that there are only so many hours in your day and there were so many rooms you could show up in. And there's this pressure to be everywhere and to represent the organization because you do have to show up and be intentional in that way. How have you found that challenge? How have you dealt with that?
The challenge of trying to be in all places at all times? Is that the challenge?
Especially when you're building a brand in that case, right? Where it's like, gosh, if I don't show up and get in this room, then we're not at the table. And then, but that's really critical. And, I think maybe that's something that even nonprofit leaders deal with that is not 100% unique compared to corporate, but it does have a different dynamic.
Yeah, it does. What I will say is both at Family Equality and the Trevor Project, there was a lot of trial and error of going to all the meetings and all of the gatherings and talking to all the people, and you start to burn yourself out a little bit because you are trying to be all things to all people and to be in all places at all times. But again, there's so many tables and there's so many activities that we need to be at to ensure that we are influencing those decisions, the movement making decisions, policymakers making decisions. Where I am now is working with my team to decide where can I be the most influential. So we've all of these things that are happening, all of these activities, all of these events. Where can Jaymes be the most influential, and where I can be the most influential, then that is where I will go. And then where we do think that we need to be, then we may send somebody, we'll send someone else. Or decide that because we do not have the bandwidth and it is not an influential opportunity, then we just will back out, right? Well, sometimes we have to say no. It really is about where can we show and advance and have the most influence towards our mission. And that is a strategic move that I'll say that is not easy, because it's easy to want to be at all places at all times, but you have to look at where you can be most influential.
Yeah, that reminder to say no, it can be so hard.
That's hard. It's really hard to say no to some things because there's so much going on. But we have to be mindful of our time and not burn ourselves out.
We talked about your pivot to the nonprofit world, and that also marked a personal transformation for you, coming out for the second time. Can you talk about that and what that internal sort of process was, and just how you managed that second coming out experience, and maybe how that's influenced your ability to lead diverse teams?
Yeah, I will say that when I was in corporate America, I was out. And I believed that the way that I was showing up was the authentic me. What's interesting is that you can, and I don't know if this translates to other sectors, but you can change a sector and find an entirely different side of you. I've been, again, in the business sector for 20 plus years or so, and believe that the way that I was operating, that I had found my authentic self, because I had gone through so many iterations of finding that self within the corporate sector because it had its own barriers. I moved to the nonprofit sector, and I was able to tap into another version, not even another version. I was able to tap into a more authentic version of myself. I was able to tap into my authentic self, is what I'll say. And that included changing my name legally to Jaymes, and using new pronouns, and moving to the nonprofit sector really enabled me to understand that the environment that we surround ourselves with influences who we are and how we show up. And the nonprofit sector influenced me to tap into a side of me that I did not know that I was hiding. And what that has really done for me is made me more of an inclusive leader. It's made me more open. It's made me, I think, more effective. I don't think if you are not living your true self, that you won't be as effective as a leader as you could be if you are living your true self. And managing or leading diverse teams, I've always done that, but I do look at it differently now in terms of, am I showing up in a way to ensure that the folks I'm leading can be as authentic as possible. I do not want to be a barrier to anyone being their authentic selves, because I know how that felt. And so I want to be as open and as inclusive of a leader as I can, knowing the road that I had to take to get here. Decades and decades of work to get here.
It's a theme I've heard from so many of our chief influencers, that when you really figure out, who you are, and you embrace that real, authentic version of yourself, that it just makes a huge impact on your ability to connect with and lead other people. And it's, of course, different for everyone, because we're all unique individuals, and what sort of showcasing that authenticity means is also different for everyone, in terms of their personal brand outside and inside. But that theme of finding and embracing that authentic self can be so powerful as a leader.
It's really powerful. And it's very powerful. And it takes courage to do so. And I do think as leaders, we're often challenged with being courageous. And but that courage also starts with how are we showing up as leaders, and being courageous with ourselves, so then we can better show up for the people who we lead.
Jaymes, how do you think about using your personal story and your personal brand to advance the mission of the Trevor Project? And do you see yourself as the face of that mission? What's the responsibility mean to you that you are the key spokesperson?
I don't see myself as the face of the mission. I see myself as a conduit. I see myself as a possibility model, and I am merely a an example of what can happen when LGBTQ plus youth survive. And because I am here and I have been blessed with this opportunity, it is my job and my role as a human to ensure that I am speaking on behalf of the youth. The youth are the face of the mission, not me. And it is my job to ensure that I'm being a voice for them and that I'm giving voice to them, because they often do not have voice. They often do not have the voice, or the ear rather, of the policymakers and the people that I have to sit in front of day in and day out, the donors, etc. So then it is up to me to take where I came from as a youth who knows what it feels like to be marginalized, who knows what it feels like to have suicidal ideation, and also the experiences of our youth today who still, 30 years after I was pulled out of the closet, are still experiencing some of the same experiences I had. It is up to me to use my experience as a vehicle, but also my need and my desire to build a better world for LGBT plus young people, and to be a voice for this organization and be an example, an authentic example of the voice of our youth. That's my brand, right? I mean, my accolades and my and all of my degrees and all that stuff, all those are great, but what really matters in terms of my brand is how I show up authentically and how I'm authentically connected to this mission, and not being afraid to use those examples, to be vulnerable in the times that I had trouble as a youth, to give voice to what people are still dealing with. What I don't want to do is, because I have the degrees and the accolades and the corporate experience, to come off as someone who knows it all because I have this title, or someone who can't be vulnerable to say that this is an emotionally charged mission. This is an emotional mission. And there are lots of challenges that our youth are going through, and I can resonate with those challenges. Let me tell you how. That's how I see my brand enabling the work of the Trevor Project. I'm an enabler.
It's very powerful.
A good enabler, because usually enablers are not good, right? But you know what I mean by that.
Well, you use the word conduit too, which I really like.
Conduit,
and
absolutely.
I think that's really powerful. Can you talk about what platforms? I'm thinking like that you use to communicate through your personal brand. I know you're active on LinkedIn. Where else? Maybe just talk about kind of how you see showing up in a way that you can scale your message beyond. Of course, you're on TV a lot too.
LinkedIn is I paused a little bit because I tell the comms team that I'm going to be LinkedIn famous someday. So that's my objective is to ensure that I'm using it, though. What I mean by that is like using it in the way that is amplifying the work. And I tend to resonate with LinkedIn versus some of the other platforms, but I use Facebook, and that's in a totally different audience. That's on Facebook. Facebook is more of my family members and people from my local community who I grew up with, but still who benefit from the work of learning about the work of Trevor. And I'm also on Instagram, and those that's an entirely different platform. It operates differently, but it's important for me to also show the work of the Trevor Project, demonstrate the work of the Trevor Project on platforms like Instagram, and that's where we can connect with some of our celebrity supporters and do collaborations with them. And so that's how we use that platform. Every single platform has its purpose, and every single platform, I don't think that you can decide to be on one and not and sort of ignore the others. I think that we're in a world now where there are three primary platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, each having its their nuances, and each having sort of different audiences, some overlap, but that you do have to figure out how to strategically use those to influence the audiences who have decided to follow you. Well, like, let's face it, when people decide to follow you, that's a commitment, right? That's an interest in who you are and the work that you're doing. And so then we must offer and demonstrate what we are doing and especially what the work of the Trevor Project, how that helps the community and the world at large.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. We've talked about influence in respect to oneself, and we've talked about influence sort of to a broader audience. I want to ask about internal influence. You lead a large, primarily remote, I believe, team now. What have you learned about building internal influence as a CEO? And especially in times of crisis or backlash, how do you keep your team informed and aligned?
I think I had a belief back in my early leadership days that, I would see CEOs and leaders show up in a town hall, for example, and that was their connection to the broader employee base. And what I had to realize, and what I came to realize, is that those are not enough. So town halls are not enough. As I mentioned earlier, my credentials are not enough to influence and lead our employee base. Influence inside an organization grows when people feel seen and heard. Mm-hmm. And they know that I and we are seeking to understand them, that we're asking for their opinions. When I understand and admit that as a CEO that I can't do this work alone, nor do I want to do this work alone, it's the ability to message passionately about our why and our objectives in a way where people understand where they fit in. Oftentimes, I'm not certain that we always do a great job of understanding that people need to know where they fit in. How does their day-to-day work when we're influencing folks, right? How does their day-to-day work fit into the strategic plan, for example, et cetera? And it's about building trust, doing what I say I'm going to do. Understand their why. Why are they here, especially at a mission-driven organization? And again, that means it's not just about the town hall. It means one-on-one with senior leaders, doing skip levels. It means going straight to the departments when I have to do that. It means having difficult conversations sometimes, having conversations with the verticals, being present in smaller, more intimate group settings, and being willing to go into those smaller group settings and have more intimate conversations. And I think the bottom line is you can't lead from a distance, and you have to meet people where they are. You have to go where they are. That's what I've learned, and how we galvanize employee base, right? Especially to move towards a mission like Trevor's.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of leaders are kind of asking themselves this question: okay, if people have to feel seen and heard for us to influence them, but we're not all in the same place and it's not the way it used to be, what are some tactical ways that we can use the technology we have today to overcome those barriers of not being physically together?
Technology's come a long way, right? Since we started just to use Zoom for meetings, and you can still use technology, Google Meets, Zoom, as a way to connect with people. You can, I'll give you an example. We have a something called a TCU, Trevor Community Update, which is more like an all hands sort of town hall meeting. And then and that is more of a live stream, so not as connective as say like an in-person, right, conversation. But then we have these smaller meetings that are still with the entire organization, but it's not a live stream. It's actually me having a connective conversation, still remote, of course, but having a connected conversation with a group of employees. So, for example, we just had one a couple of months ago where we had a panel interview with folks from the crisis services organization, where I asked them questions about their work and what they were doing, and their peers had an opportunity to hear what they don't hear all the time, to hear about their journey, to hear about their work. I had an opportunity to interact with them in ways that I did not get to interact with them on a regular basis. It wasn't about the strategic plan and the plans. It really was about, why do you do what you do here, and why do you continue to do the work? And just thinking about creative ways that we can connect with people over technology. It's about getting creative and being willing to have some of those conversations, such as,
Yeah.
again, panel discussions, asking people the questions that they don't normally get asked on a day-to-day basis. And you wouldn't believe how people open up, and how much people learn. And we have the chat open, and so their peers are giving them accolades the whole time, and it's just a really connective experience for the entire organization. Those types of things bring us together. The technology doesn't really matter at that point.
I love that example because sometimes we talk about how chief influencers share the stage. And I love how, you're taking that opportunity that you have to bring everyone together. And it's not for you to always, of course, sometimes you're sharing updates and you're sort of the keynote, but you're moderating a conversation so that your entire organization can understand what your crisis services team members are doing. And it also is kind of
Yeah.
fitting when we think about how can we use technology. A lot of organizations, their leaders are bemoaning we can't be together in person. Well, for nearly 30 years, Trevor has been saving lives by not being with people in person, right? By using a telephone. And so it shows the power of you can reach out and connect with people and do it. And I just love that panel example of a way of sharing the stage and lifting others up as one additional way to make those connections.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, in terms of the sharing the stage, because when I say we, my executive team and I, when we were thinking about the agenda and how we sort of take this all hands concept to another level where it was more connective, one of the things that we talked about is that it doesn't need to be us talking all the time. Like, we don't need to put another executive team leader or member out front in this meeting. How do we center the employees? And in fact, we had this cool flyer that we made to announce the panel discussion. I was nowhere on the flyer. I didn't need to be. We centered these three employees and their work and their why. They were on the flyer, and it truly centered them. And that does take, I think, some vulnerability, right, as a leader, because again, we're so often made to feel or believe that we have to have all the answers, and we do not, or that we have to take center stage all the time, and we do not. And I learned so much from that discussion, and now it's a regular meeting that we do. We do our all hands, and then we do our more connective panel interactions, and we'll highlight multiple people and multiple employees through those interactions.
I love that. I hope that some of our listeners steal that idea and bring it back to their organizations because it's a pretty simple concept. And I bet a lot of folks are listening thinking, we've never done that. Like, we could do that. And that is something that you can do over Zoom. And you do get my experience has been what you described is you get those interactions where people are cheering their colleagues and friends on, whether they know them personally or not, in the chat because, they want to understand, what they're doing. And by the way, James, what we haven't talked about is that many people may not know this. You started your career in a call center. And I have to ask, how did those lessons translate into human-centered crisis services? But also, that must get you street cred with the people on your team doing crisis services that their CEO actually, used to work in a call center.
Yeah, I hope that gives me some street cred. I literally used to, but then this is back in the day, Anthony, before we had text and chat, literally headset answering the phones. That's what we did. And while it was not in a crisis center and it was in a high volume contact center, tech contact center, what it did give me in terms of translation of what we do is what that high pressure situations feel like. What it feels like when you have people on the line who are waiting to get to a human, who are anxious for one reason or another, and you are trying to do your best, but you see that there are 50, 60, 70 calls building up in the queue, and you have to get those calls answered, resolved, and ensure that that person does not call back because you did resolve their issue. Now, our work obviously is a little different, because we want youth to call back as many times as they need to, because we are ensuring that we are not only there for them in an unwelcoming world, we also understand that it's more than just one phone call, right, or one text or one chat. So what it really, my history as a contact center employee and then a contact center leader in corporate America, really has positioned me well to understand how we can operate to provide the best service to LGBTQ plus young people, to ensure that they have the tools, that we have the technology, that we understand that they are our true. I'm going to be corporate for a moment. End customer. They are the true. They are who we are servicing, and we should ensure that our solutions, that our processes are equipped and adapting with them, like constantly. The generations change. We're primarily servicing what Gen Z, maybe a little bit of Gen Alpha. Are we ensuring that as our primary end customer, if you will, if I'm using corporate terms, that we have evolved our services and our processes and the way that we talk and speak and everything to ensure that we are best servicing them? That's how I could translate that experience to what we do at Trevor, but in a obviously a very humanizing way, because this is crisis services. These are lives that are on the line. So we really need to ensure that we have the best processes and clinically driven processes as well to service our youth.
I doubt you thought when you were back doing that contact center work that you would end up here and that it would be come in handy as
if anyone would have said that to me that many years ago, I don't even know what I would have thought. I would have been like, "What are you talking about?" I'm trying to answer the phone and then do my break within 15 minutes so I can get back on the line, right? Like that's what it was about, getting back on the line. And so, we need to ensure that not only are we servicing our youth in the ways that best benefit them, but the people who take the interactions, our crisis counselors, that's a hard job. That is a hard job. So it's not only about ensuring that we have the best possible processes for our youth. It's ensuring that we have the best possible internal processes to care for our crisis workers who are taking those interactions day in and day out, and that is a difficult job.
You've talked a lot about people. People are clearly at the center in terms of what you're doing, your own people on your team, but obviously the people that you serve. And I know you've said many times, Trevor's guided by a focus on people, not politics. But I have to ask, how do you lead when your mission is under attack or misunderstood?
We lead with that at the center of our mission is not a political party. At the center of our mission is not whether you understand why youth is LGBTQ plus. At the center of our mission, and we lead with that. At the end of the day, these are humans. These are young people who are young Americans, and every young American, LGBTQ plus or not, deserves to have access to crisis services. Every human that is an adult has I think, a soft spot in their heart for protecting our youth. We lead with the humanity that we are their protectors, and that should translate across political lines. So even when our mission is being attacked, even when our community is being attacked, the way that we lead is that we do not allow ourselves to be taken off course because of that. We lead with passion. We lead with conviction because we know that this is the right thing to do. And we also lead with shared values. Again, sometimes we're going to be talking to folks who do not agree with us. Sometimes we're going to be talking about folks who don't know where they stand on the issue. And the way that we have those conversations is about we are more alike than we are different. And this is about our shared values. You're an uncle too, or you're an aunt too, or you're a parent too. So are the parents whose youth who call the Trevor hotline. And wouldn't you want your youth to have access to life-saving care when they needed it? When you start to talk about the shared values, when you start to talk about our humanity, it changes the conversation. Not all the time. I'm not going to pretend that it does all the time. But it is definitely a way to start talking about the conversation outside of our political jackets and parties that we tend to hold so dearly. That doesn't tend to move the needle all the time. But our humanity and being protectors of our youth, our American youth, we're all Americans, and we should all be concerned about American youth. That's how we lead. That's how we have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've also emphasized that, when it comes to a big mission like saving lives, one organization can't do it all. And I wonder if you could talk about your approach to coalition building as a form of influence.
The Trevor Project, while the largest organization that is addressing LGBTQ plus youth suicide, we cannot do it alone. And it goes back to what I said earlier about being a CEO, nor do we want to do it alone. Our mission is to end suicide among LGBTQ plus young people, to end it. That is a systemic issue. You can't end a systemic issue alone. What you have to do is determine who you should lock arms with and partner with so you can drive the change in those systems. And the way that we show up is not that Trevor is going to be the resolver or the fixer of all things LGBTQ plus youth suicide. Where we show up and how we partner is that we have best practices. We pioneered this, and we have something to offer here. And what we would like to do is to partner with the people and the places that interact with LGBTQ plus youth on a day-to-day basis, those who are interested in helping youth. And the way that we partner with them is by sharing our best practices, by sharing our knowledge, by educating people. I mentioned the training earlier. We coalition build based on those who are interacting with our youth on a day-to-day basis, who want to do the right thing and know that we have to interact with these folks and go into specific industries and systems to influence that change. So coalition building is really important to us, and we take it very seriously. In fact, we are refreshing our entire partnership model to ensure that we are partnering with the right people that will lead to the systemic change that's needed to end suicide for LGBTQ plus young people. And again, we can't be at all places at all times, and we're okay with that. We will train you to interact with LGBTQ plus young people. We are training the state of California. All 12 of their 98 contact centers will be trained by the Trevor Project. And that's how we scale our mission. So coalition building is about sharing resources, sharing best practices, ending a systemic issue together. It's also understanding that we are a catalyst. That's what Trevor is. We are a catalyst. And we can bring these other organizations and partners together in conjunction and to end suicide among LGBTQ plus young people one day. But we can't do it alone.
You've talked about the young people a lot. I wonder, what message that do you hope LGBTQ plus young people hear when they see your leadership today?
I would say as a Black non-binary person in this country, as a Black non-binary leader, what I hope that they see with my leadership is that you can be yourself. You can be your entire the entirety of what makes you who you are. You can embrace your multitudes. You can be Black, queer, non-binary, whatever it is that you are, you can be that and still be a leader and still lead if that is what you want to do. I mean, I think about people who want to be leaders one day and think that they will be minimized or that they can't be a leader because of how they identify. And that's not the case. And we're fighting for a world where you can be a leader no matter who you are. So what I would hope that they see from my leadership is to be who you are unapologetically and do your best to not hold the pieces of you who make you who you are, that make you unique. Do not hold back, because that's what makes us powerful. That's what makes us more influential, to be quite honest.
Yeah, what I've heard from you today is not only can you be a leader no matter who you are, but if you embrace your authentic self, probably make you a better leader. which is really
Make the better
important because
leader.
we need better leaders, I think. There's a lot of challenges in the world, a lot of opportunities in the world, and, we got to have leaders
Yes.
to get us there. To close today, wish we could go on for another hour because it's such a great conversation. I just want to ask you how your understanding of influence has, evolved as you reflect on your early career in tech to your current role leading a national movement. What does it mean to you today to be a chief influencer?
Well, I'm not making as many mistakes as I did when I was younger. So I as a young leader, I think that's how it's evolved. But what it means to me today to be a chief influencer is to understand that influencing people is not only about achieving my objective. Influencing people is not about uh, being a bull in a china shop. It's a delicate dance, and it is a method of connecting what resonates with other folks and what they're looking for, and how your objective connects with what they need. So it's not just a sort of this let's get it done and I'm going to influence you by any means. It really is about understanding what makes the person tick. What is it that your objective that you're trying to achieve, how does that objective connect to what they need intrinsically? How do you connect those two things? And so that means that you can't go in and just believe that you can influence people and it's just going to happen like that. You have to understand your audience. You have to understand what drives them. And you have to be patient and be willing to understand that if you really, truly want to achieve an objective or a mission, that you have to understand the people who you're influencing and what drives and sort of makes those folks tick, the people that you are trying to influence. So I would say that I'm much more intentional about it today. It is a part of my decision-making process of how do I need to influence and who do I need to influence versus just sort of throwing a wide net and hoping that I influence someone, which is what I was doing early in my career.
Finding that flow that we talked about earlier, the root,
Flow
right, of
as
influence. And I have to say, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you. I just love the candor and sort of vulnerability that you shared about not feeling like you really knew the right way to influence when you were younger in your career, and seeing how mentors and leaders showed up in the room and learning from them, and then learning from your own experience, particularly after you transitioned into the nonprofit world and realizing the power of embracing your true, authentic self and what that means for you, the influence that we each have, with one another to build confidence and see that our own power, I guess one could say, to influence our teams and the people around us and showing up authentically with them, sharing the stage with them like you described you do at the Trevor Project through the panel discussions with your team members from crisis services and the example that you shared, and then influencing those on the outside. And certainly you have many stakeholders that you're focused on influencing now, from donors and corporate partners to policymakers to parents. But most importantly, the quote customer, if we use business language for the Trevor Project, the LGBTQ plus young people who are calling you or texting you or chatting, with your organization, seeking that lifeline. And how can they be helped if the organization does not show up and see them as who they are and hear them as who they are? And of course, that starts at the top. If leaders like you do that and your team does that, it makes an impact. And we've heard that impact is scaled from, just being on the other side of the phone, which was such a powerful thing when Trevor started, to now providing training across the whole state of California to ensure that the research-backed approach that you have, pioneered and now sort of developed and honed, the Trevor Project, can be scaled to other organizations. Since, like you said, not, with a big challenge like saving lives, not one organization can deal with a systemic issue like that alone. But by building teams, building coalitions, finding those partners to lock arms with, as you described, can really achieve so much. And it must be, very daunting to tackle such a big mission, but at the same time must be very rewarding to look back and see just a little over a year how much you've accomplished and how you have, influenced so many people's lives. So we're really grateful that you took time to share your story with us of your career and the work that you're doing now at Trevor and your thoughts on influence. I think there's so much that any leader, whether they're in the nonprofit sector, corporate sector, or others, aspiring leader or seasoned leader, can take away from the lessons that you shared with us today. Jaymes Black, CEO of the Trevor Project. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.